Hello, and we are live with the Rotoworld Fantasy Baseball Q&A. I'm Eric Samulski, joined today by Chris Crawford to talk some baseball. As always, we're going to take all of your questions. You can ask them on YouTube. You can ask them over on Twitch. You can ask a question and leave if you need to. You can ask a question and hang out. We'll be here for around 45 minutes. We'll try to get to as many of these questions as humanly possible. Chris, good weekend of baseball.
Yeah, good weekend of baseball. We're starting to get to where I no longer have to answer questions about sample size because, we've played enough baseball that we no longer have to ask those types of things. But yeah, it's been fun. And we've got a Memorial Day weekend coming up next weekend. We should have a lot of really, really good stuff. And then the season apparently doesn't end after that. So that'll be cool.
No, it doesn't. It's going to keep on going. As always, when you're here, I'm going to lean a little bit toward your expertise on some of these prospect call-ups. So we're going to get started with our prospect call-up that we had yesterday, a little bit of an under-the-radar prospect. Jonathan Rodriguez, an outfielder for the Cleveland Guardians, who I don't know that many people really had on their radar coming into this year, despite the fact that he was actually solid at AAA last year.
Right.
So what do you see from him? And what are your expectations? Manzardo came up, hasn't played a lot. Rodriguez is a righty, so maybe this is a short side platoon situation. What are your expectations?
It's an interesting call-up because this guy certainly has the power to succeed. We're talking about potentially 70 plus on the 2080 scale. I have some real question marks about it, whether or not he can hit for average. He strikes out an awful lot, already 47 strikeouts in AAA this year. Something like 150 plus averaged over the last couple of years, which is concerning. But that power can play. And this is a lineup that needs some pop. This is a lineup that can use an infusion of guys who can hit the baseball over the fence. I would imagine that he's not going to be in the lineup every single day, which is concerning for me. Maybe a guy that you see on the short side of a platoon potentially as well, because this is not one of their top prospects. This is not somebody they're calling up and you have to say, we have to have this guy in the lineup every single day, right? This is more of a guy that you have in the lineup against what his strengths are. And the strengths should be hitting the crap out of left-handed pitching. So if you're in need of pop, and especially if you're in an AL only league, I would definitely consider it. If you're talking about in a redraft league, I think you probably need to take a wait and see approach. It'd be worth it to me to see him succeed and spend a little fab than add him to your roster now, drop somebody that could help somebody else. So it's an interesting question, and I'm rooting for the guy, but there are some reasons to believe that Jonathan Rodriguez is not fantasy relevant in 2024.
Yeah, and that contact rate has gotten better this year. The strikeout rate has dropped a little bit, but you're still talking about, like, I think last I had heard from Chris Clegg, who has a lot of minor league stat databases, it was like 72% overall contact and like 82% zone contact. So those are things that are like workable if the power shows up. And if the power doesn't show up, when you get that kind of contact rate, you're not really going to help a lot.
100%. Yeah, that's a great point.
Let's go to another prospect. I've been banging the table for people to hold on to Andy Pages in fantasy leagues. I think at least as long as the Dodgers do, he should remain maybe on your bench in a redraft league. The power has certainly showed up. Even the other night, he was still hitting fifth after everybody thought he was going to get demoted, and he hit a homer. I know that the K rate is up. I know the walk rate is down. I keep looking at a minor league career of double-digit walk rates at every single stop and thinking this is a guy who has an understanding of the strike zone, and he just needs to adapt to how pitchers are pitching him. But I'm curious if you, in redraft formats, obviously, dynasty leagues and all that, you're still holding on to Pages, but in a redraft format, do you think there's enough here to hold on to him?
Yeah, I mean, you could make the call either way. It's an easy say for me to say that if you have to drop him to go take somebody off your injured list or something like that, I'm not losing a ton of sleep over it, but I would really try hard to keep him on my roster, just in part. Hitting in that Dodger lineup is such a benefit, man. Like the chance to drive in so many of those guys. And there have been lots of flashes from brilliance. The concern for me is the walk rate comes with a pretty ugly chase rate. Like his walk rate of 3.1% is bad. His chase rate of 37.1 tells you that it's not like, well, they're just throwing him a lot of strikes. Now he's swinging at pitches outside of the zone quite a bit. but the ball's landed on the sweet spot. His hard hit percentage and his bat speed and his expected slugging percentage, all well above average. The other thing, too, is he's a really good defensive player. And the fact that he's a good defensive player is going to give him a little bit of a leeway, especially with Teoscar Hernandez is not a good defensive player.
Yes.
Despite what the metrics might tell you right now, as a Seattle Mariner fan and as someone who talked to a lot of Blue Jay fans and Houston Astro fans, Teoscar Hernandez can frustrate with the glove quite a bit. So I think there might be a little bit more leeway for Pages than a typical prospect might have, just because he's going to help him with that defense. I would wait this out. Now, again, if you've got somebody on your roster that you just, or if somebody's offering you a great trade where Pages has to be dropped or included in the trade, yeah, I mean, you can justify it. But I would do everything I can to hold on to him, because that power and hitting in that Los Angeles lineup is a real benefit.
Yeah, I think it says something that, like, not only was he up when they demoted James Outman, but then they called up Miguel Vargas, and Vargas is the one that's going to be in a short side platoon, not Pages. And so at every indication, or at every moment that they've had the ability to say, we're taking playing time away from this guy, they have not, which tells us that there's some faith there that I believe means that we should have a little bit of faith as well.
And
if
also,
you want to bench him, fine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just going to say the other thing here is too, so I would bet he starts running a little bit more. This is a good athlete. He's only got the one stolen base so far. I think he's better than that. I think you can get about a double-digit pace, maybe even a little bit higher, like in that 15 to 20 range over the second half of the season. Would not surprise me at all if he ends up being a multi-category helper for the remainder of 2024.
Yeah, I agree on that one. Curious your takes on Luis Matos. I understand this is a ranking question, and we can get to some of that in a second. But I'm curious because Matos is only 22 years old, right? So there is a little bit of he's not a finished product. 17 RBIs in 6 games so far is ridiculous. And then you look and you're like, oh, he hit 218 at AAA this year. A high contact rate guy, no walks, very aggressive approach. Obviously the pace he's on currently is not sustainable.
No.
But do you believe that he has do you believe that his approach is sustainable, at least to warrant being on rosters in, all sort of redraft leagues?
This is kind of a tough one, but I am encouraged by what I've seen. Like, his launch angle is way down, which is kind of an interesting thing to see, but I think it's helped him cut down on his swing length. And the swing length was such a big issue for him, I think, in 2023. Like, he just didn't have good bat speed, but he didn't have enough to really justify having that long of levers. And that's cut down on the swing and miss so far. And that's been huge for him. A lot of this RBI stuff is, and this is the thing about fantasy baseball, it's not sustainable whatsoever, man. Like, he's getting guys up. I think he's hit with the bases loaded 86 times in his 20 at-bats. Like, I don't know how that works, but I think he is hit with the bases loaded.
But it's happening. Yeah.
It's happening. There's science behind it. I think he's a guy that I'm more interested in long-term. I do believe he could be a solid starting outfielder. But if you're desperate for some help, like if you're in a 5 outfielder league and you're playing with 12 teams, I would go get Luis Matos. The worst thing is that you have to drop the guy. The worst thing is that you end up putting him on the waiver wire. Why not take advantage of it while he's hot? Why not take advantage of the baseball deities liking what's going on with Matos right now and giving him that chance to drive in a bunch of runs? It's not sustainable whatsoever, but I think he can help you enough in categories, and I think he's going to get enough of a shot with the Giants that it's at least worth a look.
Can I ask you, Helio Ramos was seemingly outplaying him at AAA, has also had a pretty solid start to the big league season this year, but isn't getting as much attention because, the counting stats aren't crazy. Do you think that there's an argument that Helio Ramos may have as much value this season as Luis Matos, or because he's not as defensively, valuable, he might not last as long?
It's an interesting one with Ramos as well, because I was just looking at his Savant page and seeing so much red. Now, I'm not qualifying for any because he's only got 44 plate appearances, but he's a pretty interesting guy, and he's only 24 years old. He's a former first-round pick. I probably would rather roster Ramos at this point. I believe he's a little bit more sustainable at this point, but it's kind of tough because he doesn't really run. He has had a larger track record of lack of success than Matos has, like 2023 and 2022 didn't go very well. 60 plate appearances is a career high. But I do think that I would probably rather roster Ramos because I just believe he has a little bit more well-rounded game, at least offensively. Then
Right.
I imagine the Giants are going to find a way to get both of them in the lineup. But if you were asking me which one I'd rather have, I think it's probably Ramos.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, and I was saying that Scott Pianowski and I talked about it in the podcast yesterday,
Hmm.
and we were talking relative to the type of bids that it was requiring to get these guys over the weekend. Is like
Sure.
Matos was the hot commodity. You could have placed a smaller fab bid on Helio Ramos, and it
Yeah,
may not have actually wound up much different. And so it's interesting to hear you say that you would actually might think that Ramos has more value overall.
right.
I will say of the guys here in terms of like ranking, it is tough.
Hmm.
I think Eddie Rosario is on a heater right now, and that's great. He's probably the fourth of these guys for
Yeah,
me in terms of, especially rest of season. I still am a believer in Ian Happ.
me too.
I want to put him first here. I understand it hasn't been great. I think he hits in the best lineup of all of these guys too. And so if he starts to get it going, there's value there. Springer, listen, there. I understand you look at Springer's age and you look at his production and you say it's over. There's nothing glaring in any of his metrics that's like this is drastically different. He's hitting worse than he is before. He's popping the ball up a little bit more. So
Sure.
maybe there's a continual like slight degradation of talent. And so if you wanted to take a flyer on the upside of Matos over Springer in a shallower format, I can understand that if you're in a format where there's always going to be something on the wire. I just think like if I'm in a deeper format where I really do need to hold one of those two guys for like 3 or 4 weeks, I'm not ready to fully say that it's over for Springer right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I mean, I am concerned for sure. This is now a fairly decent sample of being pretty terrible, and he's
Yeah.
downgraded pretty much every year. Like that, that is concerning. And he's going to be, I believe, 35 this year. I think he's 34 now. So
Mhm.
it wouldn't be completely unheard of if he fell off the crater. I will say this too. One of the reasons why I think Eddie Rosario is an interesting fantasy pickup. I'm not sure he's playing for the Nationals for that much longer. I could
Right.
totally see that guy being traded to a contender.
Well,
I guess the concern there would be if he's traded to a contender, he might be in a platoon situation. So he's
sure.
going to see maybe
But
a little bit less playing
and
time.
that could be
So
strong. That could be strong side too.
yeah, absolutely.
And his production has happened to coincide with the collapse of Jesse Winker, which is giving him a
Yes.
little bit more stability as well. I certainly don't mind Rosario, especially as a
No.
short-term ad.
Hmm.
We'll see what happens when Lane Thomas comes back.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, it's an interesting question here from Jetta about anything pointing towards Hunter Brown turning things around. No is the answer.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean that in the sense that like I looked a lot at Hunter Brown. I still
Yeah.
believe that the individual components that he has can produce a
Sure.
very solid major league pitcher. I wrote about him last year at the beginning of this year, I covered pitchers who made drastic like pitch mix changes in the second half of last year. And I
Mm,
basically identified that Hunter Brown was just constantly changing things in the second half last year. He was
right.
totally tinkering with the pitch mix. It didn't seem like he knew how he wanted to attack hitters. Unfortunately, that's continued this year. He's constantly changing things. He changed where he stood on the rubber. He's changing how much he's throwing the sinker. He's changing how much he's throwing the four seam, where he's throwing the four seam. This isn't a young pitcher who is sticking to an approach and seeing how it works and
Yeah.
then maybe making adjustments. It's a pitcher who seems to be changing every start or two. And considering the lack of success and the age, when I see him changing that often, to me, it reeks of lack of self-confidence. And so even though like in a dynasty league, I might be floating some buy low offers on Hunter Brown because I think the talent that he possesses is
Sure.
there. I just like in a redraft league, I don't see a lot that makes me super confident in it happening now. And then I see like the Astros go out and do something so under the radar, but like sign Eric Lauer. And like Eric Lauer has been a pretty useful
Hmm.
major league starting pitcher on some organizations before. And I know he wasn't off to a good start this year, but would it be crazy for, if you're saying, hey, Luis Garcia or Lance McCullers are coming back at the end of June, early July,
Yeah.
Would it be crazy to say, like, let's just send Hunter Brown down, let's get 3 or 4 starts from Eric Lauer and see if it's anything before those guys come back?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I was just playing around with his Savant page and looking at his knuckle curve has been one of the worst pitches in baseball this year. Hitters are hitting 421 against it. They have an expected slugging percentage of 644, which is really bad. An actual slugging percentage of 842, which is much worse. Weighted on base average of 542. Like his secondary stuff just isn't working. Like the
Yeah.
fastball has been somewhat effective, but not really. A weighted on base average of 427. The only reason I would answer that question with can he turn things around? Because it can't get worse. Like he cannot possibly be worse. The problem with Hunter Brown is you're just going to get a bunch of 5-inning, 4-run starts from him. And yeah, that might get you a win. That might get you a win, but he's not going to help you anywhere else.
Right.
I think you have to completely cut bait with Hunter Brown at this point. Is there a little bit of FOMO based on what he did last year and some prospect pedigree? Sure, but there's just not enough reward that goes with the risk in 2024.
And I don't think there's any sort of there's I don't think there's the runway that we expect.
Yeah, 100%.
I'll throw this one out quickly since we were just talking about IL guys like McCullers and Luis Garcia. Do you have a preference? Best dad asks, who's a better IL hold, Jason Dominguez or Jeffrey Springs? So if you had to hold one in a redraft league, who are you holding?
I'd probably hold Dominguez. I'm just not sure what kind of role Jeffrey Springs is returning to. So, I'll take the hitter usually over the relief pitcher anyway, I'm not sure what kind of role Jason Dominguez is going to have either. There's been talk about him being the designated hitter. There's a 6'6" linebacker who is currently doing a lot of designated hitting for the New York Yankees right now. But I do think that's a 5-tool talent compared to a reliever that is going to be used in high leverage situations, but not necessarily as the closer. The Pete Fairbanks situation maybe makes it a little bit more interesting, but if I had to have one for 2024, I'd go with Dominguez.
Yeah, and I think the question is like, the question becomes, are they going to move Springs back into the rotation, like he was before he was hurt? But again, you're coming off an injury. And so given his history as a reliever, it might make sense to keep him in the bullpen and maybe do like a Ryan Yarborough type of thing. And there's some value in like, if he's throwing 3 innings, 4 innings out of the pen and stealing some wins. But I agree with you. I think Dominguez has the higher upside for this year. I think the question about Dominguez is playing time, right? Like he's blocked right now. But listen, the Yankees have some guys that are injury prone. Both of these guys you're talking about like at least a month before they're coming back. So if I had to stash one now, and again, I'm waiting a month.
Yeah.
Stash the guy with higher upside because let's say you stash Springs because Dominguez is blocked and 2 weeks from now, Stanton gets hurt and you're thinking, oh man, now there's an opening for Dominguez and I don't have him. I'd much rather, Jeffrey Springs get closer or somebody get closer and then find out, oh, there actually is no spot for Dominguez. And
that's
I can make
point.
a swap then.
Absolutely.
Another IL one we'll just get to real quick. Super Dave asks if Scherzer is worth adding and stashing over a guy like Crochet, Houck, Musgrove, King, Pavetta, Javier, Darvish, Springs. So a lot of these guys not on the IL. So let's take this as kind of like a bench spot stash, right? Maybe we're talking about like an NFBC format type of play. I'm honestly going to say no to probably every single one of these guys as I'm looking, except for Springs. Yes, I would take Scherzer over Springs.
Yeah.
Houck is on the fence for me, and I say this as a Red Sox fan too because I know how great he's been. I also know that like the issues with lefties are going to continue. His BABIP against lefties right now is so ridiculously low. He's not doing anything different to lefties this year, which is causing them to like hit worse off of him. It's just his stuff is playing up. He looks really good, but I don't know that he's the talent of Scherzer. But again, you're talking about a pitcher in his 40s with a back injury.
Yeah.
I just don't know what we're getting out of Scherzer. I don't know if how healthy he's going to be. I don't know how long a leash the Rangers are going to give him. I don't really know when they're going to push him back. So guys with legitimate upside, like, Musgrove, Pavetta, King, Javier, Darvish, like I can't stash Scherzer over those guys.
Yeah, I would agree. I thought I was going to be the crazy person when I saw this question and say that I'm not taking Scherzer over any of them. But look, all of those guys have more upside and a probably higher floor. I like Scherzer was okay last year, but he wasn't the fantasy ace that he
Right.
was the past few years. And there's too wide of range of outcomes here. Now, look, we'll see how Gary Crochet handles the first modern rigors of being a starting pitcher. You
Sure.
mentioned the issues with how Musgrove already had an injury. King still has a little bit of a question mark about how he's going to handle a full season.
Mhm.
But I'd rather take my chances with those guys over Max Scherzer at this point. I would love to have Max Scherzer stashed somewhere, because if he is that version of that guy, it would be great to see. By the way, the fact the Rangers are in playoff contention, I know there's a lot of playoffs.
Yeah.
I think I can name 1.5 Texas Rangers starting pitchers right now. Like with all of those injuries, I think I can do 1.5. I think Roger Pavlik is in the rotation, right? He's one of the guys who's starting. No, it's pretty crazy, but I just don't know what I'm going to get from Max Scherzer. I have a much better idea from what I'm going to get from those guys you list outside of Springs. Like,
Yeah.
I think that the high leverage thing was a brain fart type of thing. He's going to probably work as a bulk guy, and the bulk thing can work for the win chances. I don't think the counting stats are going to be there enough. So I'd rather have Scherzer in that situation, but that's the only one.
Yeah. We talked about the Guardians a little bit before. Let's go to another Guardians guy that is kind of being picked up a lot recently. That's David Fry,
Yeah.
who started the year as kind of a left-handed platoon, or sorry, a platoon against left-handed pitching behind the
Right.
plate with Bo Naylor, has now emerged as a pretty regular bat in their lineup against both righties and lefties. Will still
Sure.
sit every now and then against righties, but playing primarily against both hitters of both or pitchers of both handedness. He's DHing some, he's playing left field some, he's played some first base. This is a guy who didn't debut until last year when he was
Yeah.
already 27 years old at that point in time. But maybe it's potentially a new level. So I guess my question is, A, what kind of confidence do you have in David Fry? And
Mhm.
then let's compare him to, say, Michael Busch, right? A prospect
Sure.
of some note who has struggled a little bit, but we've seen the power carry over. Do you have a preference in those two guys?
Yeah, and I think we can just say that Josh Bell is third on that list right now.
Sure.
Like,
Yes.
especially if he's going to stick with the Marlins, there's just not enough run production potential. I mean, David Fry is this year's Andy Diaz. Like, the approach at the plate is just so good, and they're putting up kind of similar numbers at this point. In the 99th percentile on Baseball Savant and walks, doesn't swing at pitches outside of the strike zone, doesn't provide great power, but I think he gives you enough doubles that, like, in leagues where slugging percentage matters, and they should, it's going to be something that helps you in that category. I still think I would go with Michael Busch. I'm a big
Mhm.
Michael Busch believer. I think that guy has really good power, a pretty strong approach at the plate. It's gone through some ups and downs already, but the ups have been really good. Like, especially that stretch where he seemed to be hitting a home run every single night. I think Busch provides a little bit more upside, so it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for a higher ceiling, I think you go with Busch. If you're looking for a little bit higher floor, it's weird to say for a guy that did not have a strong prospect pedigree and is 28 years old already. I think I would go with Fry there. And also, just to make it clear, if you're playing in an OBP league, then David Fry, if he's still available in your league, what the heck's going on?
Yeah. Let's add just one other guy to that, because
Mm.
Dad asked basically the same question,
Yeah.
but he adds Luke Raley into
Yeah.
this. Now, Luke Raley is a notoriously streaky hitter who is on a hot
Sure.
streak right now.
Yeah.
And so you have that component added to it. He is also starting to play a little bit more every day. Now, he will
Sure.
sit versus some lefties, but he did
Mhm.
start versus the last left-handed pitcher that they faced last week,
Mhm.
which tells me that if he's swinging it well, they're going to keep him in the lineup against a lefty while he's going this good. In 15 games in May, he's hitting 417, 3 home runs, 11 runs scored, 8 RBIs, does also have 2 steals, and the
Yeah.
strikeout rate is down to 19%. I know you liked Michael Busch over Fry. If you're in a league where, again, in a shallower format, like a 12-team league where you can cycle through some of these guys when they're on a heater, would you
Sure.
take Luke Raley right now over David Fry while he's swinging it like this?
I think I would, and in large part because of the fact that I do think he is going to steal you some bases. Now, he stole another one yesterday. He's up to 3 now, 311, 343, 456. He's been pretty easily the Mariners' best hitter for 2024, and that's even with a disastrous start to the season where he was hitting around 130 for way too long. It worth pointing out, this is a Seattle Mariner hat. This is a Kingdom shirt, so I've had a chance to watch him quite a bit this year. And there's been some luck, like he had a couple of doubles against Baltimore that had an average exit velocity of -6. There's no doubt that there's been some BABIP luck here, but we've seen when Luke Raley is hot, like he was a really good player for Tampa Bay in the first half of last year. And it's possible that he's just kind of figured some stuff out, like not a former top prospect, but a guy who had some top 15 votes on stuff and was a guy that the Dodgers tried to hang on to as long as possible until ultimately having to make that move. I also like the fact that he keeps moving up in the order, and I won't be surprised if he's hitting 3rd or 4th soon for the Seattle Mariners. And, hitting 3rd or 4th for Seattle, not quite the same thing as hitting 3rd or 4th for some other clubs, but it does give you that RBI potential. He's starting to drive the baseball a little bit more. And Scott Service has come out and said basically that Luke Raley is a big part of this roster. So the fact that he can help in many more categories than Michael Busch can, I would put him and over David Fry, honestly. But that's a really good question. All 3 of those guys have a chance to help. They're just very similar players because they can play first base, but very different players in terms of what they're going to give you.
Yeah, I'm interested. I am interested and pleased because I've been in on Luke Raley recently that you're mentioning that you also think over David Busch, or sorry, Michael Busch. David Busch, terrible. I'm looking at this next question, and it's asking about Vinny Pasquantino. We'll keep it first base centric. So interestingly, this is a 10-team OPS league, so that does obviously factor in the on-base percentage, which is something that is going to be important for Pasquantino because we do know that he has a really good feel for the strike zone. I have no concerns about Pasquantino. Like I'm looking, I've created a custom leaderboard on Fangraphs that I like to use for like hitting targets that just has some of the hitting categories I really like to look at. It has O swing percentage, it has barrel rate, it has swinging strike rate, it has just overall contact rate. And first of all, from May 1st on, so we're looking at it's 68 plate appearances for Pasquantino, but he's hitting 271 over his last 68 plate appearances. So that's pretty good. I know it only has 1 home run, but 16 RBIs within that. But just a 15.7% barrel rate, just a 7% swinging strike rate, an 86% contact rate. Like this is who he is. He's going to make a lot of contact. He's not going to swing and miss. He was always probably like a 20 homer type of first baseman, not a 30 homer type of first baseman. I still think that you could get that from him. Like I understand that right now the power isn't coming, but he's hitting the ball hard, as we just talked about. His max exit velocities are pretty much in line with where he's at. He has 5 home runs in 46 games. Like it's not crazy for him to get 15 more homers. No. And so it would not surprise me if at the end of the year, you're looking at a guy who's hitting between 270 and 280 with 20 homers and not a lot of strikeouts. Again, a good on base percentage. So I'm kind of trying to buy low on Pasquantino if I can, because I still believe in what he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and by the way, just the first part of the question, I can guarantee you Vinny Pasquantino is into the season. From everybody I've talked to, this is a very hardworking guy. It's frustrating that he's not providing the type of pop that necessarily you get from a first baseman one, but barreling the baseball close to 10% of the time suggests that he deserves a little bit more pop. And just taking a look at some of the numbers against pitch types, like expected batting average of 320 against fastballs, 325 against sinkers, but he's only hitting 182 against him. Expected slugging rates are all pretty darn solid against everything but sliders. And who the heck can hit sliders anymore? In the year of our Lord 2024, I think the one thing we figured out is that sliders are really difficult to hit. I think Vinny Pasquantino is going to be just fine.
Yeah. Go out and try to see if you can get him if you can.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his teammate for a second. The question from Basebone is Edward Julian or Michael Massey? Um, and I think I'm gonna say Michael Massey.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, like the issues that we pointed out with Edward Julian in the past of like you're too passive and you take too many strikes, and so the strikeout rate is probably higher than it needs to be based on your overall quality of contact. Like we're
Sure.
still seeing that.
Yeah.
He's striking out over 30% of the time in May. Meanwhile, Massey has come back. He's hitting fifth in the lineup, and I know the Royals lineup isn't, you know, elite, but it's actually better than people give it credit for.
Right.
He's hitting behind some guys he's able to drive in. He had 15 homers last year. So the fact that he already has five and is striking the ball really well shouldn't be like a crazy thing for you. Um, Strikeout rates down. Like I'm looking at it right now, and I don't know what he's like. That he and Edward Julian are both not gonna run. It's not like you're gonna
Right.
get stolen bases from one and not another.
Sure.
Julian is in a situation where he will be platooned because the Twins love to platoon.
Right.
Um, so I don't know. I don't know what Edward Julian is going to give you that Michael Massey isn't currently giving you.
Yeah, and my big concern here is that Edouard just cannot hit anything that's not straight. Like, and I think people are starting to figure that out. Against sliders this year, a 154 average, and if you think it's bad luck, it's not. Expected batting average of 155, only a 38.5% hard hit rate. He's really struggled against changeups as well. Against fastballs, he's been great. Woba of 512 will tell you how good he is when you give him something that is straight and in the middle of the plate, basically. Like, he can really hit a fastball, and I do love the approach, but it's probably a little too passive. He's one of those guys that I think is a better real-life player than a fantasy player, like a guy that I want on my roster. I'd love to have him off my bench, even though I don't think he's very good defensively. I think that's one of those, John Vanderwall types with a little bit less power, the guy you like to have on your roster. But there's not a huge amount of fantasy relevance. I would probably be looking to upgrade on both. I think Massey is a solid player, but again, a little bit more real life value than fantasy. But if you're asking me which one I'd rather have on my roster right now, and this is shocking to me, I'd rather have Michael Massey.
I'm in agreement with you on that as well.
That's
Let's Moises Mara asks, with nearly 200 at bats, what are we doing with Randy Arozarena? My take on this is a little bit of like Scott Pianowski has the term, likes to use the term forced hold.
Sure.
And I think that Randy Arozarena just falls perfectly into the category of like a forced hold. I don't really know that you want to trade him because I don't know that you're getting anything from him that is going to be commensurate with the value that you know that he can give you. I don't think you can drop him because we've seen too long a sample size of him being a very usable difference making type of fantasy player because of his power and speed. You also have a guy who has 8 homers and 7 steals already
Right.
this year. So he is on pace for another 2020 season. He's got a 182 BABIP right now. The strikeout rate is high.
Sure.
The launch angle is like slightly out of whack, but not crazy. Infield fly ball rate is up. He could be. We'd have to get into how he's being pitched. He could be lifting too much. He could be just getting under balls. Maybe if hitters are attacking him up in the zone.
Sure.
The zone I am seeing the zone contact rate is down to just 73%. Which is like a pretty big drop from where he's been at the last 2 years. But again, that could also be a swing plane thing. Why am I popping things up? Why am I swinging and missing in the zone? Well, I'm swinging under everything, right? Maybe that's a minor change like that. So I don't know. I don't know what you can do with a Arozarena unless you're somehow getting value for him, or maybe attacking another hitter or pitcher who's not doing well, who you're like, I'll buy low on, I'm going to say Blake Snell, but I don't really know that I mean Blake Snell, but like,
Sure.
you get the idea that like, I'm going to buy low on somebody like that, who's struggling, and they can take Randy Arozarena and maybe it works out.
It's interesting with the Arozarena too, because it seems like he has about 200 plate appearances like this every year. It just so happens that the 200 have at the beginning of this year. Usually it's kind of in the middle. He starts out pretty hot. We've seen with him in the postseason. And I'm sorry, there's a sample size there where I absolutely believe Randy Arozarena is just built for October baseball. But man, oh man, is he scuffling. Anything that is sweeper centric, he is just not going to make contact with. And if he does, it's not going to be very hard. But yeah, you're pot committed. You took Randy Arozarena probably in the first 4 to 5 rounds. You just can't cut bait on a top 50-ish pick. You can't do it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You hope that he makes the adjustments. And like you mentioned, there are some numbers that suggest that he can do that. But boy, oh boy, you got to be frustrated by what you've gotten so far, because it has been probably the most disappointing. If you just take top 50 players, most disappointing player not injured in 2024.
It's certainly up there for sure.
Yeah.
We alluded to this a little bit at the beginning of the show, but HP is asking, what's the plan for Vargas? Is he here to stay? The Dodgers came out today and said the plan is for him to be part of a short side platoon with Chris Taylor in left field. So as of right now, the plan is for Vargas to play only against lefties in left field. Obviously, we know plans can change, but that doesn't strike me as A, he's here to stay, or B, he's somebody you really need to run out and get. I was intrigued by the fact that he had added some power in the minors this year. But I think unless something changes injury-wise to the Dodgers lineup, or unless Vargas has a couple games that look like Luis Matos and the Dodgers are like, okay, well, we can't keep you on the bench.
Right.
It's hard for me to add him in fantasy leagues right now outside of like an NL only type of format.
Yeah, I would probably just steer clear. I do like him in the long term, and I think that he could probably benefit from a change of scenery. Like, the Dodgers are just so stinking good, and they just don't really have the patience to wait on a Miguel Vargas. They just have too much invested in the team and have too many quality players that if he was to be traded somewhere else, I'd be a little bit more interested. But in a platoon situation, knowing that the Dodgers are probably going to be pretty aggressive in the next couple of weeks, I would imagine, looking for an outfielder, I would just steer clear of Miguel Vargas, barring a trade.
Yep, I agree. Uncle Ted chiming in. I wanted to put this out there. He said Jake Myers is the Astro outfielder people should be talking about. Well, Uncle Ted, Scott and I talked about him yesterday on the podcast. So I fully agree with you. Jake Myers is the outfielder, the Astros outfielder that people should be talking about. Myers was an interesting outfielder a couple of years ago, got hurt, there was a really good article in The Athletic. If you could go to The Athletic and just type in Jake Myers, you might be able to find it. I'm sorry, I can't remember who wrote it. It might have been like Chandler Rome, who writes a lot of the Athletic stuff, the Astros, but basically talked about the mental struggle that Myers went through trying to come back, and that he actually was going to like a mental health coach this offseason with the Astros. That was like really a struggle. Him struggling wound up being a real struggle for him because he had never kind of experienced that before.
Sure.
He's playing pretty much every day right now, hitting 290, 5 home runs, 2 steals in 40 games. I know people are like Chas McCormick is coming back, but Chas McCormick wasn't playing particularly well before he got hurt, and he was never guaranteed the starting center field job. I mean, I think because of the way he played last year, we assumed he was, but I think Jake Myers is hitting too well to just go to the bench as soon as McCormick comes back.
Sure.
Loperfido is hitting righties well to like at least stay in some kind of strong side platoon. So I don't know that McCormick is coming back to a full-time role. Maybe they're going to see how things shake out between Myers and McCormick and Loperfido and see which two of them, can stay in the lineup more often. But I think Jake Myers is somebody we shouldn't just be dismissing right now.
No, absolutely not. But let the record show that Uncle Ted and Eric prefer Jake Myers to Kyle Tucker, apparently, because there's apparently is only one outfielder you can talk about.
Well, he is the outfielder people should be talking about. Yeah, that was the one spot where I'm like, obviously we're not touching this guy. He's
100%. Let me have my fun, Eric. No, Jake Myers. I mean, you take a look at that Savant page, and there is a lot of stuff in the 90th percentile or pretty close to it right now. And with how well he's played, and considering how well he's played is kind of correlated for the Astros to kind of make a little bit of a run to get back into the division race too. Jake Myers is going to play. They are going to find a way to get him in the lineup. And the other thing is Jake Myers is a really good defensive player. Jake Myers is somebody who can go get it in the outfield. His outs above average are in the 95th percentile, and he's in the 90th percentile in sprint speed. Jake Myers is going to play, and if he's still available in your league, I'm absolutely adding him to my roster.
Yeah. Another guy who I am adding, if he's still available, is Alec Burleson, who's another guy that Scott and I talked about yesterday. We mentioned that things have not gone well for the Cardinals this year, at least not according to plan. But that has opened up playing time for guys like Alec Burleson. And, everybody joked when Alec Burleson was getting at bats over, Jordan Walker, or I'm trying to think of the other. Not at that point, Dylan Carlson had already kind of been fallen out of favor, but here's the Cardinals giving at bats to an older non-prospect over their prospects. But Burleson's only 25 years old. He was pretty good in AAA in 2022. And he's hitting 301 this year with 5 home runs, 2 stolen bases, 17 RBIs in 40 games. He has a sub 17% strikeout rate. He is barreling the ball about the same as he did last year. However, he's hitting the ball on the ground about 8% less, which has led to a jump in home run to fly ball rate. He still is doing this weird Cardinals thing where they used to be a pull fly ball team, and now they just don't like doing that. I mean, he's pulling the ball only 33% of the time. But Burleson's hitting in the middle of that lineup, and he's hitting well right now. And I don't see any reason why they're taking him out of the lineup, given the rest of the offense.
Yeah, just to answer the second part of that question, how Walker is doing in the minors. Okay, he's hitting 318, which is good, with a 378 on base percentage, 424 slugging, but has not hit a homer yet in 74 plate appearances. That's a little bit concerning, but I just want to say this, 2 things about St. Louis. Number 1, do not give up on Jordan Walker as a long-term play. Yeah. If you're in a dynasty league, this guy has the offensive potential to be a superstar today, or a superstar in the coming days, excuse me. And number 2, those City Connect uniforms are so boring. Why has everyone gone so boring with these City Connect uniforms, especially the hats? You might as well have just gone into a gift shop in the St. Louis airport and picked up one of those hats instead of this thing. Come on, show some excitement. This is what this is supposed to be about.
I do think that some of the City Connects really have fallen short. I do kind of love what the Rays did, though.
Oh, the Rays,
a lot of the Rays stuff. It's so
beautiful.
Good.
That hat, especially. I've got one coming to me in the coming days, my friend.
Yes. Oh, beautiful. I need to wear more hats, because then I would get things like that.
I don't have anything below here, so I have to wear these hats.
Look, you've got support from Cardinals fans.
Thank you, my friend.
On your opinion on the City Connects. This is a generic, this is a little bit of a vague question. It might be hard for us to figure out, but I just wanted to, we'll see where we're at. Dad is asking who are some good buy low candidates, understanding that, buy low is a little bit subjective.
A lot of it, I would say, but yeah.
A lot of it subjective. I did want to just say, okay, I pulled up the leaderboard that I had, and was looking at guys who were doing the things that I wanted them to do in terms of barreling the ball, not chasing the ball, but we're not producing numbers that maybe have people saying, oh, I have to have this guy on my team. Interestingly, Andrew McCutchen shows up on that. He's hitting 221 over his last 100 plus plate appearances, but he's got a 20% barrel rate, just a 17% O swing, and a 10.5% swinging strike rate. So I think that there might be some more pop coming there. We talked about Vinny Pasquantino. Colton Cowser is somebody that if people gave up on Colton Cowser, I am not. No. I understand the strikeout rate is 30% over the last 100 plate appearances, but the walk rate is 15% and the barrel rate is 17%. And they've kept him in the lineup. And I think we always knew that there would be some swing and miss to Colton Cowser's game. But I think the power is real. He has flashed that. Sure. Tyler O'Neill, I guess, if people soured on him, his stats post collision with Rafael Devers are not great, but he's still barreling the ball a decent amount. He's still not really chasing, just a 23% chase rate in over the last 100 plate appearances. So I kind of dig that. And if people are thinking that he's hurt, go for it. I don't know. I still kind of look at Francisco Lindor, and I'm looking right now, 11.5% barrel rate, 11% swinging strike rate, 77% contact rate over the last 130 plate appearances isn't great, but it's also not terrible. The
Right.
strikeout rate is sub 20%. 6 home runs, 6 steals over the last 130 plate appearances. So I'm not seeing anything that's egregious here in terms of the overall profile. I know that the contact isn't what it used to be or what we expect it to be, but I
Sure.
don't know that that's the decline. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I was just looking to see if there was anybody that I would consider buy low as well. And Luke Raley. Luke Raley's the
Yeah.
first one that kind of stands out. Go get him while you can, because especially if he starts hitting fourth, fifth in that lineup, the chances to drive in runs, driving guys like Julio Rodriguez and Big Dumper is going to be something that really helps his fantasy prospectus. Another guy I would be kind of looking at is I could see Hunter Harvey being moved to a contender in the next couple of weeks. And I know it's relievers, but we're talking about if you're playing, especially in a holds category. And I also could see Hunter Harvey going to a contender and getting a chance for more saves too. That guy's stuff is just so sick. And this is now a pretty large sample of him being one of the best relievers in baseball. If you're kind of desperate for saves or not doing so well in the hold categories and Hunter Harvey is still available, he'd be somebody I'd be looking to pick up for cheap as well.
Yeah, I'd add Jordan Leisure's name to that because I think
Nice.
the White Sox want to trade Kopech. They've pretty much stated they want to try to trade him. So I like Jordan Leisure. I like Ben Brown as a possible save stash for the second half of the year because the Cubs bullpen I don't think Hector Neris looks particularly good.
No.
I think they've been a little bit of a mess.
Sure.
I was going to say Justin Slayton because I know the Red Sox are looking to trade both Kenley Jansen and Chris Martin because they're in the last year of their deals. Right. Slayton has stumbled a little bit of late, but I still think that somebody else is going to be closing games there from late July on. So there are some guys that I could look at. I did say there was some comment in the chat about Corbin Carroll being a buy low. I don't know your take. I am actively avoiding. I don't think he's healthy.
Yeah.
The power is not there. I understand that everybody looked at the bat speed metrics and was like, oh, well, his swing is fast, so he's healthy. I also think he spoke openly about the swing plane change, that his swing got flatter, which is why he's not lifting the ball. But if you have ever swung a bat and finished, one-handed, the higher your finish is, the more you're straining your shoulder. The lower your finish is, the less you're putting strain on that shoulder. I don't think it's a coincidence that his swing plane has changed to be something that puts less strain on your shoulder. I know that he hasn't come out and said that he's hurt, but I just don't think this is a healthy player. And so I'm not looking to buy low. I think this is another forced hold situation where I'm not trying to get rid of him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't see him being fully healthy. And he's played through this before.
Sure.
So I understand that people are going to say why is he playing if he's hurt? And first of all, not everybody tells their team that they're hurt.
Yeah.
Guys want to try to play through things.
Sure.
Guys also expect to play dinged up, right? There's a difference between I'm in immense pain and I'm dinged up.
Yeah.
Guys expect to have to play through some things. These are guys that have a lot of pride.
Of course.
And if you're saying he's not hurt, then he's been terrible. And there's no other reason why he's been terrible other than he changed his swing for some reason that we can't identify, and it has sapped all his power. And now you're expecting him to have to change it back in the middle of a season, which is hard to do.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think either way, it's hard to buy in on him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if I would say the only exception to that would be if somebody is just desperate to cut bait and you're moving somebody and that's an obvious point is obvious type of thing. But yeah, he doesn't look like the same player. And That's not to say that he can't figure things out in the second half. It's just betting on that, I think, would be a mistake. So if I am somebody who drafted Corbin Carroll, I think you might have to explore trade stuff, but just don't be surprised when the market is not what you were expecting.
Yeah. We'll end with 2 questions here. This is kind of like an either or, but in a utility spot for a head-to-head points league. So points leagues obviously favoring power a little bit. But are you taking Dansby Swanson or Spencer Torkelson?
That's kind of a tough one. And it's for a utility spot. I'd probably rather have Swanson, especially knowing that he's going to be coming back. I think today is the hope. I saw somebody asking.
That was the rumor, or
they were talking also about Nico Horner. Somebody asked a question in the chat about him. I think it sounds like he's going to be back either today or tomorrow as well. So that's good news for that. I just don't trust Spencer Torkelson right now, which is a weird thing to say for a guy who was in the second half of last year as good as any first baseman in baseball. He absolutely looked the part, and it's possible we see that version again. I just would rather have the well-rounded game of Swanson, knowing that he is a shortstop who can hit the ball over the fence as well.
Yeah, I did some looking at Torkelson in the past, and especially when the bat tracking stuff came out. He has a real hole in his swing middle in. If you look at like his StatCast run value based on the strike zone, middle in is like a really bad spot for him, as is up and away. And he's being thrown up and pounded in more than last year. I think pitchers are realizing where he struggles, and that's why you're seeing his launch angle is up, but his pop-up rate is way up. His infield fly ball weight is way up. I think pitchers are jamming him or pitching him up and away, and he's not able to get on top of the ball and drive it. And so Dansby Swanson for me over Spencer Torkelson. And then this last question was Cowser, Jake Myers, Luke Raley, Kevin Pillar, or Helio Ramos. I will say right now I'm taking Kevin Pillar out of that equation because despite the fact that he's hitting the cover off the ball, the Angels sat him 2 games in a row. So if you're not even going to play him every day when he's playing out of his mind, I can't do it. And I'm going to take Helio Ramos out of that equation as well, because I think you have some playing time concerns for him. What happens when, Conforto comes back? Is he going to stay up? Just what is his pedigree? And we know the type of player Cowser is. So I think it comes down to Jake Myers or Luke Raley. And I still, for me personally, am going to keep Cowser. And I think Raley is number 2 for me on that list.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Like, we've talked pretty nicely about all 3 of these guys. My only concern with Cowser is because of how gosh dang loaded that outfield is. Like, if they feel like he needs to go to AAA to work on some stuff, they can do that without even like a blink of the eye type of thing. But if you're talking about just like who's the most talented, who has the most fantasy upside, it's not even close. It's Colton Cowser. Like, this is. And by the way, for all the Jackson Holiday people who are concerned, take a look at what Colton Cowser did in 2023 and look at what he's doing in 2024. Baseball's really freaking hard. Jackson Holiday is going to be just fine. And Colton Cowser is showing that he's just fine as well. Like you mentioned, the strikeout rate considerably going up. But I just think that in terms of like a 5 category player, Colton Cowser is the best of those guys.
Yeah. There was a question about whether you would hold Kobe Mayo or not. I'm just curious with the rib injury.
Mayo, that's a really good fantasy name. This is a tough one because yes and no. There's just, it's so hard to say where the heck is Kobe Mayo going to play, but at the same time, they're going to find a way to make this work if they believe Mayo can get up. And also, what a great trade candidate that guy is, because if any team can afford to move a top 25 prospect like him, it's the Baltimore Orioles because of what they have built. So I would be holding on to him in that regard. Like if you have a really deep bench, I think he is worth holding on to. And if he gets the call up, he's an immediate fab guy for me. But boy, oh boy, is it hard to find a path to the majors right now.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the path is Jorge Mateo.
Right.
Because you can move Westberg to second, and maybe you're giving Jorge Mateo a little more time to struggle, which he has done most years. And so I think there's an opportunity for Mayo. He said yesterday that he's going to come back quicker than people assume. And so maybe he's back in like 2 weeks or so, but I still think, that's going to delay the call up a touch, as
Sure.
has the slightly elevated strikeout rate this year. So who knows? But I still think he's a pretty priority stash if you have the bench space
Absolutely.
to do it.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. On the Rotoworld Q&A. DJ will be back next week. We're doing this every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Please make sure to go to the website, NBCsports.com, and check out what we're doing. Chris puts up every Monday prospects to stash, I guess you would refer to it as, kind of like redraft
Sure.
prospects.
Mhm.
So that's already up on the site. That's definitely something you should check out. A lot of the guys we talked about today are in there. Tomorrow I will put out my mixing it up column, which looks at pitch mix changes. This
Nice.
article this week is going to feature Yu Darvish, Jose Soriano, and Robert Gasser.
Nice.
So if you're interested in those three guys, make sure you check it out. And we will catch you next Tuesday for more live Q&A.